on Kassis' side.
And what I really like about Ely's list is the 4 copies of Lot Latrol. I saw a lot of lists with 3, and to me it just seems by a mile the best card in this deck, because it's good when you're doing all your graveyard shenanigans, and it's also really good when you're just playing an honest game of Magic.
Yeah, I think so. I've actually had the chance to pilot this deck a fair amount on Magic Online. The downside of Troll is that you don't actually want to pitch your whole hand to it. Like, a lot of your cards, when they hit really hard. You know, it'll be a Night Howler for 4 mana that bestows for X equals 7. You know, a 2 mana 5/5 in Nemesis. Lot Left Troll's pretty fair, and the rest of the deck's not very fair. So I think that's one of the temptations to cut down on the card. But against a deck like Blue-White Control, it certainly can be pretty good.
Yeah.
Commune with the Gods gives Kassis the option between Nyx Weaver and Night Howler, and he goes ahead and opts for Nyx Weaver.
The deck also just does a lot of nonsense against attacking decks, and Lot Latrol is very good at just stemming the early tide.
All right, so he's going to go ahead and take that. Davis having to read the card. This is certainly, I think, a card that had the newest inclusion out of the sets. You see it over there on the left. Nyx Weaver helpful. Every turn it mills you for 2, and it has a straight regrowth effect on sacrifice. It's not just returning any creature, it can return any card from graveyard to your hand.
A card you may not have anticipated showing up in Standard when it was printed, but just does a lot of little stuff. The self-milling and the regrowth, very good for this deck. And the 2/3 reach is not that bad in Standard right now. There's a lot of random flyers. It lines up with threats like Nightveil Spectre very well. So Nyx Weaver just does enough little stuff to warrant inclusion in a deck like this.
All right, but the Nyx Weaver gets syncopated, and then Jim Davis responds with a Blind Obedience. So Kassis can have to find another creature. He starts with Grisly Salvage. It's going to find Herald of Torment, another copy of Nyx Weaver, and Night Howler, 2 lands. So he has all the options available to him, and he's going to go ahead and go for a land. That dumps 3 more creatures into the yard.
A little surprised to see Blind Obedience in the post-board games. The Dredge deck, not a lot in the way of haste, and also not really in the market for incremental damage so much.
Yeah, the Dredge deck does play Mist Cutter Hydras. Like, against Control, oftentimes it turns into just a ramp into Mist Cutter Hydras deck. So perhaps Jim's responding to that aspect of the deck.
Sure.
But you're right, outside of that, there's not much haste in the deck. Or any.
And Mist Cutter Hydra is certainly not the only path to victory for this Dredge deck.
No, it is a card with a lot of game. It's like that the deck relies on a lot post board. I mean, the deck's playing 4 Commune with the Gods, 4 Grisly Salvage, and then it's playing Elvish Mystics. He doesn't have Caryatids in the deck, but so it still can try to just play, you know, find Mist Cutters, cast Mist Cutters.
I also like the absence of Sylvan Caryatid in this list, even though it is one of the most powerful cards in Standard and seems custom made for this sort of deck. A lot of the susceptibility this deck has is to something like Supreme Verdict just wiping your board away, and leaning on Sylvan Caryatid to generate your mana makes Supreme Verdict even harder to beat. This list can kind of just play 1 or 2 threats at a time and force a response.
Right, we see a swing from Nemesis Immortals there. And that's going to be the first damage. Davis goes down to 15. He does have a Supreme Verdict in hand, so he can take care of the Nemesis, but we do see Golgari Charms waiting in the wings from Kassis to regenerate through a Supreme Verdict.
Kassis a very methodical player. Doesn't play a ton of tournament Magic, and so maybe not a name you're familiar with, but he is very good.
Yeah, another Commune with the Gods. We see some Lot Left Trolls, a Satyr Wayfinder, and one of the 2 copies of Gerard Golgari Lich Lord.
Draw another angle of attack for this deck.
Yeah, so one that you can get out of the yard, certainly. And so he'll bin the Gerards so that it can get cast later. And he'll make Satyr Wayfinder. That will open himself up to Supreme Verdict.
But this is not a board that Ely cares too much about getting hit with Supreme Verdict. I mean,
it's just a Nemesis Immortals.
Everything else is providing it some amount of utility. And this induces it all by itself.
Yep. He scries a card to the top and passes back to Davis. We'll see whether or not Davis pulls the trigger on that verdict. He also has the option of a Detention Sphere and a Jace. And he has an Azorius Charm backing things up. But he'll go ahead and verdict with Extort, putting himself back up to 16.
This is kind of the position you want to get Blue-White Control into, though, is where they're forced to respond and tap out on their own turn, and you have opportunities to land your own Haymakers.
Yeah. Blind Obedience is doing some work here. Kassis can't just crash with a Mist Cutter for 5. But the Mist Cutter's still there, and Davis does not have an answer to Mist Cutter in hand at the moment. Kassis has to be happy that he got Davis to use a verdict on not Mist Cutter Hydra.
Yes. Because his answers to other things like Azorius Charm, Detention Sphere, those provide no defense against Mist Cutter Hydra.
Exactly. So Kassis is going to shock him for the Overgrown Tomb. And even though it's tapped, Mist Cutter Hydra for 5.
And keep in mind in all of this, as Ely is going about his business here, these threats require immediate response from Jim, and Gerard is looming in the graveyard through all of this. So things are really tough on Jim right now, and he has to be mindful of that card at all times.
Yeah, right now, Ely already has the ability to sack lands, get Gerard back. He can, with one more land, get Gerard back and activate him in the same turn, so basically give a second shot to one of his creatures. The draw for Davis was Sphinx's Revelation, so he has a plan now, but we'll see what... I think his plan is going to be to rev for 3 immediately. He didn't play Jace that turn.
And Ely has drawn a Herald of Torment this turn. I don't know if he's necessarily going to cast it, but this is another part of his multi-dimensional attack to avoid cards like Supreme Verdict and a single removal spell blowing up. Once he gets to this stage of the game, he can just start bestowing Herald of Torment on the threats, and that requires another answer and then another answer.
Grisly Salvage cast by Kassis. We see Lotleth Troll and a Jared and some lands are the options. Troll can be really good against black control decks because of its regen ability. Against blue-white and the fact that they play cards like Banishing Light and Detention Sphere, it is not as relevant.
And it's also possible the ship has sailed on the sort of incremental early beats that Lotleth Troll applies. We've moved to another phase of the game where Jim's going to be casting Haymakers and Ely needs to respond in kind.
Yeah, Lotleth Troll it's also very good to bestow onto in the deck because it has Trample. But I do think we're past that point, and Ely does as well. He goes and takes a Swamp and just uses Lotleth Troll as another card in the graveyards.
And a Swamp is nice too because I believe it puts Ely in a spot where he can return Gerard twice if the game gets to that spot.
Now he has 7 lands, so it's not... Yeah, no matter any basic land gives him that option now.
Right.
He already has 4 of each. So the Bestow does 8 damage, puts Jim down to 8. He's going to rev for 3, back up to 11. He's going to need an answer here, and right now he doesn't have one. He drew a Deicide that'll take care of Herald. But as control decks are oft to do, he simply just draws another Sphinx's Revelation off the Revelation.
Yeah, he's still got to try to keep his head above water here. And again, Gerard makes this all much more complicated. He can't be that liberal and lax about using his life total as a resource here.
Right, he has most of his removal. We see Dissolve, Azorius Charm, Detention Sphere. He has some card draw, he has Revelation and Jace. He even has a Deicide. So most of the tools his deck has to offer are in his hand, but that Mist Cutter Hydra is still problematic for him.
Yeah, it's unclear and actually quite unlikely that he has the tools the breathing space to rev for 4 here. It looks like that's what he's going to do. He does have Dissolve as protection in all of this, so if Ely does something really dramatic, then Jim can protect himself, but...
And this is actually a much sharper matchup than I think is anticipated at first. You know, the fact that Jim verdicted away that Nemesis as opposed to, say, Detention Sphering it, I think is really coming back to get him right now.
Well, I think he has a lot of respect for the potential of Golgari Charm. And if you're going to play this game where you're anticipating tapping out at various points, putting a Nemesis under a Detention Sphere is a huge risk. Because at the end of your turn, you get hit for 10 spots. So even though that play looked a little weird on the surface, in the post-board games, Jim just has to respect the possibility that his enchantments get blown up pretty regularly, and he can't do things like pin down a 10-10 under a Detention Sphere. Right. That's a route to get killed out of nowhere.
So it's possible he could have had to Azorius, just leave left up 5 in Azorius Charm.
Maybe, yeah.
Which feels so bad with 5 mana, just only making a 2 mana play. And Kassis is going to go ahead and go for the Gerard here. And I think Davis is going to have to counter. He's going to Dissolve with Extort on that Gerard.
Yep.
Puts him up to 12.
And Ilya isn't even that upset about all of this because it means that Jim is not revelating this turn. And now with this hit coming in, he's unlikely to be able to revelate the following turn, although this Deicide does give him some breathing space.
Right, Deicide with Extort on Herald of Torment. So Davis has gained 2 life off extorting this turn, so he's taken a net of 3. He went up to 12, now down to 9. So that, or up to 12, sorry, down to 7. So you have 12. All right, life totals are currently cards. So it's 8 and 12. He also gets to see Kassis' hand.
And there is an Elspeth.
And that will work for Davis. That was one of the ways he can remove Mist Cutter. So he's going to cast Elspeth with Extort.
Well, okay, he's going to minus. I was going to say if he pluses, then he's running right into the jaws of Golgari Charm, killing him.
Right, so he's going to go ahead and minus, get the Mist Cutter off the board. And Golgari Charm is still good here.
Yeah, still covers it.
But it just buys time, which is I like how Davis is playing this. It's what he needs to do here.
Well, the problem is that I think that this just means Gerard kills him.
Does he have...
Oh, is he...
Kassis doesn't have the mana.
He's short.
If Kassis, a basic land would get Davis. Here.
Right. So Jim gets to live to fight another turn.
Pretty big turn at that.
Yes. And if Ilya devotes resources to trying to kill this Elspeth, that's really good for Jim as well, because that might get him to the spot where he's able to resolve that revelation.
Yeah, this turn seemed pretty pivotal. It's the one, I'm not sure if Kassis will get another shot like this to end the game.
Well, he's going to have to win through basically non-combat means going forward, or with something like bestowing another Herald of Torment onto this Mistcutter Hydra. But the ground is about to get locked up, and it's also dangerous for him to attack Elspeth because that's 5 damage off the table here. Can you beat a follow-up Supreme Verdict Sphinx's Revelation if you give up on these 5 points of damage?
I think you still have to kill the Elspeth, would be my guess. We'll see. They're both... he has in his hand Nyx Weaver and Satyr Wayfinder. Yeah, he's going to go ahead and take care of the Elspeth. With no second Golgari Charm, that's his play. And Nyx Weaver into play. He does have 3 mana up for Nyx Weaver, so he has a lot of options of cards he could return here.
Yes.
Right, we are on extra turns here. This is turn 1. Unlikely that Davis can win in turns.
Yes. Very unlikely.
Yeah.
And now you're likely to see the players slow down just a little bit here as time has been called, and so the clock no longer an issue.
Remember that Nyx Weaver can get cards that are, it's not just creatures that it can get. It can get any card. So if Davis, say, slams an Elspeth, he does have to worry about Nyx Weaver getting back Golgari Charm.
So Jim just doing some quick consulting here. His hand really doesn't provide much in the way of defense for Mistcutter Hydra. Detention Sphere, Azorius Charm, those provide no help.
Right, so he's probably going to end up just casting more Revelations, would be my guess. But yeah, things are dangerous here for him, especially if Kassis finds that land.
And usually when your opponent is think, go, usually that means that there's a Revelation coming.
Now, Revelation put Davis up to 13. Kassis would have the option to regrowth a land if he really needed to. If he just wants to be on that Jared line. It's no longer lethal because of Revelation. So he's going to mill Shadowborn Demon and a Forest. He's opting to keep the Nyx Weaver.
I mean, it's a 2-power body right now, which is not bad, so.
Right. And that swing will be for 7. This is at Davis. So if he casts Revelation here, Davis can Revelation up to 13. He'd go to 6. Kassis could put him to 1 with Jared, but 1 is not 0, so he would still be safe.
Yeah, at that point, I think that he may just want to leave the Nyx Weaver up.
Yep.
Have insurance with his Golgari Charm. And both players basically know what's happening right now. I mean, Ili knows that this is a rev for 4 coming, almost certainly.
Yeah, and even his insurance policy wouldn't be much because of blind obedience. I mean, there's not much he could do to win on turn 4 if Davis finds a verdict.
Yeah.
So Davis goes to 2, and Kassis is going to go ahead and get back this Jared. Get back, cast it. And here's where the response has to happen on Davis' side. It's going to be a rev for 4. It puts him up to 6. He's going to need a supreme verdict. And I think it's just, or an Elspeth. Right, you see there that third land, Kassis could put him down to 1. It's not 0, and looks like verdict was found on Davis's side. Absolutely was, along with yet another revelation.
Yeah. So Jim, with the tools to defend himself at this point.
Yep, I would guess we're heading to a draw here.
Yeah, Gerard being tapped because of blind obedience.
Tapped because of blind obedience. All right, we see so many options in Jim's hand. He can play Fearless of Golgari Charm. He has a negate backup for that supreme verdict.
Complicating matters a little bit for Jim is this attention sphere in hand, where, you know, I'm pretty sure he would ideally like to keep some of this stuff out of the graveyard.
Yeah, well, I mean, Kassis only gets 1 more turn, so I don't even know if he has to worry about that. Right, there's no way that Kassis, once after post-verdict, can deal any damage on turn 4.
Sure.
So he's going to go ahead and verdict with Extort, it looks like. Or just verdict.
Well, he gets a trigger Extort, see if Ili responds. Well, I guess no, because the trigger goes off the stack and Supreme Verdict still on the stack.
Ili can ask, are you going to Extort? And then when Jim answers, then Ili can decide if he has a response. Well, he'll put Davis down to 1 with the Jared trigger. And that puts him to 1, but 1 isn't 0, and that last point's gonna be real hard.
Yeah. And I was a bit skeptical of blind obedience, but it has been excellent in this game.
Yeah, it has certainly saved Davis. I mean, Mistcutter Hydra is so important in this matchup.
Sure.
And so that should be, well, we'll see what he does. I mean, like, this is turn 3. Look to be headed toward a draw.
Yeah.
And he'll cast Jace, -2ing into Syncopate, Guildgate, Island. He'll take the counter spell and pass. So turn 4.
Something random that punks him out, deals a point of damage.
I don't even know what it would be. It's not Satyr Wayfinder at the very least.
It is unlikely for that to be the card.
It would be Grim Guardian. If he played Grim Guardian right now, that would win. I don't know why he'd have one in his deck, but it would get him. That's the only card I can come up with, though. He's going to go ahead and get back Jared, cast Jared. This is turn 5 for Jim.
Yeah.
And yeah, he would D-sphere. Yep. All right.
I think Jim is saying.
I have this game covered. But
the question is, does Ili want to be in the draw bracket?
Yeah, and also, like, that's something, Ili was clearly playing for the win there too, as opposed to, sometimes when you're playing to try to win in turns, you make very suboptimal plays. But either way, our match is done. We'll bring you back to the booth while the players figure this one out. But it looks like, at least on board, we have a draw between Jim Davis and Eli Kassis.
Yeah, that looks like a draw. So